There are a lot of people asking me what they should do. So anyway.
Right. So let me also take it to a fine point to bring it a little bit more. This is not just to be instructive, but just to understand. So from what you're saying, and C-Spot said something similar, and Mr. Jackson, is that you don't like the amendment that Mr. Howard made to his original order. The original order limited to public health and safety. The amendment was when it was raining, you could export if you met the standards. And you're saying that this is, and I'm projecting from the previous one, that the situation is so dire that even then he shouldn't have let it go.
Well, yeah,
I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking.
I hate to sound agreeable. There's certainly things to discuss. Rainfall below the dam is different than rainfall above the dam. That doesn't mean that anything below the dam should or can be exported because it's in excess of the 1,500. Mm-hmm. We saw from apparently we're going to lose the winter run salmon, but perhaps water that's being exported, if it remained in the river and was outflow, maybe that would help to some degree for one of these species that's in trouble. I don't know that. But that water could also, like I said, be recycled, recirculated around through there are things that could be done, but generally water that's below the dam that runs into the rivers is subject to use. Now, if all the other uses are satisfied, then maybe there's some exports. I know Michael Jackson's will shoot me now, but
No, that was a precise answer. I
once in a while I like to sound like I'm a nice guy.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
One question, one quick question. You said that there was no one on the working group, real-time working group, that represented the Delta interests. Who would you recommend be on that?
Well, that's a tough one. Again, the negative view of me says I'm not sure I'd like the idea of real-time management under urgency conditions. Now, the other side of it is, we need to work cooperatively and find out what we can do because there's no water. But the notion that we could have a small group sit down and decide, okay, well, let's amend the urgency petition without any public hearing is really scary to me. If you wanted somebody from the Delta on a panel, I'm sure we could find someone. Probably Dante, because he's so warm and chipper.
He's smiling.
Retract that last one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We may come back to some of these issues, but let's move on so we hear from everyone. Javier Guzman, Water for the Land Committee.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Madam Chair and members of the board. I am a member of a group of people from the Central Valley that are in the epicenter of this terrible drought situation. My claim to fame is that I pick cotton when it's 2.5 cents a pound in the Central Valley, Huron, California. And now that entire area went from a beautiful fruit and vegetable basket to a dust bowl. And it's happened because of years of neglect and also Mother Nature. I'm here today to advocate for a group of people that are pound for pound the most productive human beings on the face of this earth and who pick the crops that all of us get to enjoy so that we can boast about the things we have done up here. There are situations right now where towns like Huron, Mendota, Fireball are going to come into 50% unemployment. We have a situation right now where the Oro Loma School District, one of the most beautiful school districts in rural California, disappeared, folks. 2 parochial schools have disappeared. Yes, the president has landed and the Congress has landed and everybody is kumbaya. But in the next few weeks, the most productive people, the ones that feed our face, are going to be in the bread lines because they can't support themselves. And I haven't heard about that today. What is the problem? The problem is, one, that the Mayas and the Aztecs resolved a long time ago. Before they built their civilization, the Mayas built a lake around the civilization to support themselves. The Mayas carved trenches into the mountains to bring water and put them in the caves. Now young kids go swimming in those caves. They stored water. There are three simple issues that you need to address. Number one, there's a drought, and it's here. Number two, there has been 40 years of neglect and mismanagement of the Endangered Species Act. And number four, the consequences are very dire in our community. The increase of the valley fever, the increase of asthma and upper respiratory diseases is climbing because there's too much dust in the air. Is there a health and safety issue? Yes, there is. Most of those children in those rural communities are going to have to live off of food stamps and government assistance, and most of those children, 90% of them, qualify for free and reduced school lunches. Nobody's talked about that today. So I ask you, I implore with you, I beg you, if you're a response team, if you were a medical team of respondents, and I worked for the state health departments for 17 years, you go and you respond to that emergency. You don't hold hearings. You don't hold. Can you imagine if you were in an automobile accident and the team, emergency response team, had to hold a hearing and hold a seminar session to save your life? We'd be in a terrible situation. I ask you to please move forward. There are problems. I outlined the problems. Number one, mismanagement for 40 years. Number two, we have a drought. And number three, 1976, we're at 38 million people in California. Of course we're going to have water problems. But we can fix them. If we found an antidote or a vaccine for the AIDS virus, I'm sure we can find a solution for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Just so you know, this hearing is specifically about the actions that the State Water Board is taking, and that's why you saw us in the weeds, but there is a whole drought response effort dealing with emergency relief and all of that as well. But thank you. We are aware and pained by what's to come. Next, Rick Ortega from the Grassland Water District.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the Board, for the opportunity. Rick Ortega, General Manager of the Grassland Water District and the Grassland Resource Conservation District. The Grassland Water District is the largest refuge water supply in the CVP, and we're located south of the Delta. South of the Delta, refuges receive Central Valley Project water exported by the Bureau of Reclamation. The Board's order will have an unreasonable effect on the wildlife that depend on south of Delta refuges. My district provides water specifically to the Grassland Ecological Area, which is among the top 5 most important wetlands in North America. The Board's order does not address the potential catastrophic ecological effect that it will have on south of Delta refuges and does not provide sufficient protections to avoid these disastrous consequences. The order limits diversions from the Delta to only water needed for health and safety purposes. Cutting off the supply of water required by south of Delta wildlife will harm hundreds of thousands of migratory water birds and the threatened giant garter snake south of the Delta. Most folks don't realize that we do have that listed species down there. These species depend heavily on the managed habitat in the grasslands, and this year will arrive, as they do every year, and we simply cannot divert them to another area. Without the CVP water that is provided to the grasslands as mitigation for the loss of California wetlands, there is a great risk of an environmental emergency. This occurred after the water cutbacks during the last severe drought in the 1970s, and major steps have been taken to try and avoid this reoccurrence from happening. In 1992, CVPIA was enacted, which requires reclamation to provide level 2 water supplies to refuges, with up to a potential 25% reduction And speaking to your question, we're looking at about 25% refuge water supply this year. We were notified by Reclamation actually today, 40% level 2 for 85% of the south of Delta refuges really is a 25% allocation, knowing that level 2 isn't the whole of our water supply. The current National Wildlife Refuge, the sad remnants of the Tulare Lake Basin, is looking at a 16% water supply. The board's order presents a great risk of ecological emergency south of the Delta. The grasslands is a precious resource that requires a relatively small amount of water. Of this, the whole CVP, refuges constitute about 11% of the project. So when we speak about 40% level 2, that's 40% of a cherry relative to 40% of a watermelon. Grassland Water District respectfully requests the board modify condition 1A of its order so that the board limit on CVP export does not apply to the deliveries of refuge level 2 water supplies. We also request that the board modify condition 4 to add refuge water requirements to the list of proposed uses for conserved water. Finally, request the board modify its order to direct the drought management team to consider all opportunities for meeting the level 2 water needs of the refuges. We have submitted a letter to the board that provides more information about the critical issue of south of Delta refuge water supplies. Thank you for your consideration of these comments and for trying to balance the adverse effects of this drought on farmers, fish, but also the waterfowl.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. We received it earlier today. Next, we have Dante John Nomalini, Central Delta Water Agency.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board. I'm Dante John Nomalini. I'm manager and co-counsel for the Central Delta Water Agency. First of all, what we're faced with today is not just a fish problem. It's not a problem with this 1 year of dry weather. It's a problem where we've overcommitted our resources. The two projects that we have operating, the CVP and the State Water Project, have overcommitted the resource. The original plan was to develop enough water to supply firm yield at the end of a 6-year drought. They did the planning for the 29 through 34 period. And then there was this conflict in water rights between the federal government and the state. And the state, when it developed the Oroville project on the Feather River, overlapped water that the Bureau thought they were getting under their previous permit. And so they were shorted water. And the State Water Project, of course, tried to ameliorate that by developing a program of moving forward as the demand would arise to develop projects primarily in the second stage in the North Coast. By the year 1981, if you look at the plans, they were expecting to bring water into the Delta system, the Sacramento-San Joaquin system, from North Coast. And by the year 2000, 5 million acre feet a year was to come in from that development. So today, we're operating the projects at least 5 million acre feet short if those people that did the planning before did a competent job. And I would suggest, and I'm going to send you some of those documents so we can revisit it. It looked to me like it was very comprehensive. And many of you probably weren't cognizant at the time, but they moved forward with North Coast development with the Dos Rios project, which is on the middle fork of the Eel River. And then under the Reagan administration, they decided not to go forward with that project, to do further studies. Then subsequently, we had Wild and Scenic Rivers. We had this governor's deal with trying to lock up North Coast rivers in order to get SB 200, the Peripheral Canal Bill, passed. So we have a very serious problem with water shortage, and we have to figure out how to allocate a short supply. Now, I've been before this board, before you all were here, advocating that the projects be required to set forth a plan of how they will meet water quality standards in the future, you have to determine what kind of carryover storage you must have in order to meet those standards and determine what the surplus water is that would be available. Now, I'm not suggesting we reinvent the wheel in the middle of the crisis like now, but we have to face that reality. I was here in 2009 when the fishery agencies, well, actually it was the project operator said, hey, we're lacking cold water and storage. We need to waive or get rid of the February outflow standard. As it turned out, they weren't telling the truth. They were exporting unregulated flow that would have been necessary to meet the standard. But in any event, there was a crisis at that time, and the board didn't even say to the project operators, don't do that anymore. Come to us first. And the fishery agencies, when I cross-examined those people here, they said they didn't consent to it, but they didn't object to it. They basically looked the other way. So to let the project operators, the state and the federal government, deal with their compatriots, the state and federal fishery agencies, is not providing us the degree of protection that we need to make responsible decisions. I think the state board could play a greater role in that, and hopefully they will. Now, last year, and I sent you a bunch of paperwork on this because I was really irritated by what happened. Again, the cold water crisis was upon us. And Tom, and I criticize Tom, I apologize for being mean to him, but sometimes I get out of hand. Tom and Craig gave him this look away. Well, okay, you're going to violate the standards, and we won't recommend enforcement. That's not an appropriate way to deal with the standards.
But it was also at the request of the fish agencies.
Yeah, the fish agencies, if you remember, they requested that the Delta agricultural standards be relaxed in order to keep cold water in storage. They didn't say one word about exports. And in fact, and I sent you the information, I asked for an investigation, a compilation by the state board to verify my calculations and my analysis. And it looks to me like they actually, they moved the cold water standard from Red Bluff up to Anderson, so basically relaxing the standard. They violated the agricultural standards in the Delta, and guess what? They exported more water than they had previously planned. Now that is a serious problem. We do not have our state and federal agencies that are operating the projects trying to meet the standards. They're trying to satisfy demands of the contractors. And it's a water short situation, and therefore they're favoring the contractors. Now when I look at the panel of people that are making the decisions, and I don't want to be on the panel meeting 3 times a week, I can't do it and defend my clients at the same time. But that panel ought to meet where people could listen into the conversation. If the public should be involved in that process, and if some other people want to attend those meetings, they should be able to do that. There needs to be a more public process. Not that it's going to change the decision making, but there should be a more public process. And even this decision with regard to this temporary urgency change, John Herrick and I went to the CalFed Ops meeting, and we said, why don't you notify people ahead of time? And your staff did, but there ought to be a public announcement or something that goes along with it. Not that you necessarily have to change or delay your action, but there needs to be more public exposure of the process. And if there was, I think there would be better decisions. I think we would get a better fair play operation of the project. Now with regard to the current situation, 2 things I suggested based on my experience with droughts in the past. One was creation of a drought water bank, and number 2 were barriers or physical measures in the Delta. Mark Cowan, the director of the Department of Water Resources, says, well, the water contractors prefer to make their own deals, changes of place and use and things like this. And those, to me, are somewhat on the edge. you know, we're taking a place of use that might be in Colusa County, and we're including Southern California and the Valley. And maybe that's justifiable during a crisis, an emergency, but it needs to be only temporary. Our measures that are taken under these circumstances need to be clearly temporary. We do not want to change the whole water rights structure in California based on emergency actions that carry over beyond the drought. So I would ask that we look carefully at that. There's paper water floating around here. And I think, Tam, you mentioned it. People give up the water in the river and pump from the underground. It might be interconnected. You might be transferring that. So we've got to be pretty careful about what we do, or we're just moving that problem to another area. Anyway, there's not going to be a drought water bank, apparently, and it'll be an individual negotiation. The second thing was barriers. And I looked back at those old plans. In fact, Craig Wilson prepared for you a report on temporary barriers and things like that I thought was very good, and I looked at it. And some of those barriers that were put in the past aren't needed now because conditions have changed, like Contra Costa Water District has new intake locations and this and that. But in going through those studies, and I'm going to provide them to Mark, I know he hasn't read them, at least not the ones I looked at. There is an opportunity. He talks about the 2-gate project, which was very unpopular a number of years ago because it blocked off navigation in Old River. Well, that same study looked at restoring portions of the levees on flooded Franks Tract. So if you close the holes on the westerly end of Franks Tract, and the alternative that I think deserves further analysis is the east side open alternative. That did not block any of the major channels. It closed those remnant levees, which I think can be done without any significant objection from the boating or navigation interests, and it performed better than the 2-gate project that they analyzed. So I think it's really worth looking at as a possibility. Now, that's not going to solve our problem. We've got a major water shortage problem, but it will help with water quality in the Delta. And my attitude towards the water quality for the Delta is that, sure, we're going to take a hit. That's how we take a hit, is water quality. We can pump salt water if we want, but it's not good.
Right.
And if there's flow below the dams and the other needs are reasonably taken care of, there's water for export. Now, I don't know how much rain we're going to get or what those conditions are, but just to say you can export water that's unregulated or abandoned without looking at the balance for a water quality for us in the Delta and for fish and those things, that is too drastic of a phraseology in there. It should be something subject to balancing interests with the other concerns. So anyway, we're in a tough spot. We're here today. We can't do anything about it, but boy, we ought to straighten this. We ought to take this opportunity to straighten out the system and get our projects operating so they can tell these people down south or wherever what kind of water you can rely on for your permanent crops or for development or what have you, and what you cannot rely on. Because when we temporarily supply somebody with surplus water, that generally creates a new demand because they don't understand they're only going to get it 1 out of 4 years or 2 out of 4. So it's an opportunity for us to straighten things out, and we stand ready to help. Of course, we have to defend most of the time, but we do have some time to do something positive, too.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
A lot to think about. Next, Felice Pace from the Klamath Forest Alliance, and thank you for your written testimony as well.
Thank you. It's Felice Pace.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
As a Felicia, I just went there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's
Felice.
Italian. It's Italian name. I'm the water chair of the North Group of the Redwood Chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm river coordinator for the Klamath Forest Alliance, and I represent the Alliance on the North Coast Streamflow Coalition. These comments are my own, but they have been reviewed by 18 coalition members that share many of these ideas. I'm going to speak to water availability actions today, not to the Delta situation. I'm
Okay.
from the North Coast in Klamath. And, you know, and I want to try to address these questions. But first, I want to point out something very similar to what happened with this carryover, lack of carryover storage, lack of long-term thinking that Mr. Jackson and others have been referring to. Last fall on the North Coast, we had and in the Klamath, we had the largest run of salmon in recent history, including a relatively large run of threatened coho, and a number of those fish are listed. But because there was so little water and because irrigation and groundwater pumping continued unabated, a lot of those fish didn't make it to spawning grounds, and we lost an opportunity there. This is like being penny wise and pound foolish, because if as a result of that we lose an opportunity to rebuild some runs, then the restrictions from the Endangered Species Act and other regulations are going to get more strict, or at least are not going to be lifted. So, you know, in a drought situation like this, it's tempting to, and we see it, you know, cut back on flows, cut back on the needs of the fish. But if we do that and we further endanger or place these species further at risk, some of the water users, all water users, are going to see more restrictions in the future. And part of this is the groundwater pumping. So I think, you know, in terms of your questions about water availability, I would say prioritize watersheds where there are ESA-listed salmon and steelhead, and where we know with substantial evidence that surface irrigation and groundwater pumping have in the past or are likely to dewater significant stream segments. In these watersheds, all irrigation from ground or surface water should end no later than October 1st in this drought year. If stream dewatering or low flows are preventing young salmon from migrating to the ocean or surviving in stream, irrigation should be curtailed as needed to prevent catastrophic losses from which we cannot easily recover. Some holders of water diversion rights for stock watering divert much more water than they're right, because DWR has taken the position that stock water rights measured at the point of delivery, not at the point of diversion. This means that some people run full ditches year-round. When surface water diversions and or groundwater pumping must be limited to prevent stream dewatering, which water diversion for domestic use and stock watering should also be limited to a maximum 1 cubic foot per second unless a water right holder can demonstrate to a state official a valid need for higher diversion rights. We are in, you know, I'm addressing things that the governor could do under the drought regulation, as well as things that you could recommend to him, as well as things that are under your authority.
Mm-hmm.
But under the drought declaration, there are police powers, there are emergency powers. So in deciding whether to curtail surface irrigation and groundwater pumping to protect listed and at-risk salmonids, the State Water Resources Controller and the governor should first rely on adjudicated in-stream flows where they exist. Where they don't exist, we're going to have to rely on our experts at Department of Water Resources and NOAA Fisheries to tell us what the minimum flow needs are. If the drought continues as expected, it's also likely that in these watersheds, in some of these watersheds, just curtailing junior water right holders will not be sufficient. And we had reference here as well to transferring from surface water to groundwater. After the 77 drought, there was tremendous amount of irrigation well drilling that took place, and now many of the water users on the North Coast in places like the Scott River Valley have groundwater systems and surface water systems. A lot of the assistance for water conservation from the feds has gone into developing groundwater systems. So dealing with groundwater where it's interconnected and where we know it's interconnected with surface flows from studies and so forth is going to be necessary if you're going to be effective. Doing curtailments that are not effective, that just affect a switch to groundwater pumping, is not going to do the fish, the public trust resources any good. In addition, we think the State Water Resources Control Board should do all it can to support voluntary and facilitate voluntary water forbearance programs like the program that exists up on the Mattole River Basin on the north coast. During the drought, voluntary temporary transfer of water rights to in-stream use should be encouraged and facilitated. Programs promoting and facilitating voluntary forbearance and transfers need to be provided adequate state funding. And in the longer term, State Water Resources Board and Department of Fish and Wildlife and the legislature should encourage and fund permanent retirement of consumptive water rights and permanent dedication of those rights to in-stream use in watersheds like the Scott River Basin, where I own a home, where surface water is known to be over-allocated. Water leasing for fish flows is not a solution. Public trust resources, we can't afford to have fish buying water. They have a public trust right to enough water to survive. But permanently retiring over-allocated water rights through voluntary purchase and dedicating that in stream is the way that we can start to get this over-allocation of water under control that was referred to by several of the speakers. It's not limited to just the Central Valley. It's the North Coast as well. We have a number of basins that are over-allocated. So I summarized the comments, but you have the written thing as well. I think the main point is that when you're talking about curtailment, you have to look at the entire situation with groundwater, and we don't have all the authorities in place, but under the drought declaration, the governor, on your recommendation, can do some things to prevent us from just moving to groundwater if there's a surface water curtailment that's going to suck the water back out of the streams in some of these basins. That's the kind of analysis we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I have not been the best timekeeper. I'm saying that because I was wrapped with what people were saying, but I'm going to start getting a little tighter because I know people are anticipating to speak. So if it's 5 minutes and you hear it ding, we're going to have to stop, other than if we have a question to ask you. Lucinda Schur, Contra Costa Water District. Sorry, I pronounced that the way I learned in school. Did I get it right?
You pronounced it better than I did, because you have the
I did
retroflex.
Beijing Hua there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, sorry.
We're simple country people.
Oh,
Don't curl our tongues. Members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll keep it short. I'm from Contra Costa Water District. As you may know, we rely solely on the Delta to divert water for 500,000 people. We understand the need for standards relaxation in this. I believe one of the earlier speakers called it an abnormally below normal year. However, we are concerned that it will cause water quality degradation at our drinking water intakes, which will in turn affect our ability to maintain storage in Los Vaqueros Reservoir, which could be used in emergencies or in future, if this drought keeps going, future drought years. So just to main comment here is that we strongly support the use of temporary barriers, as DWR has already presented, that could be installed quickly and would lessen Delta water quality impacts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, the municipal intakes are the highest priority among equals. Okay, Chris, we've already heard from. Barbara Vlamis, Executive Director, Aqua Alliance. I saw her a second ago. Okay, I'll hold it out till she gets back. Frederick Gale, Director, Sacramento Suburban Water District. Really? All right, hold that one too. Patrick Porgins, Planetary Solutionaries. Maybe they're having a little meeting out there. You did? All right, I'll hold them. David Guy, Naqua. Oh, and Thad.
We will take advantage of your panel opportunity if that's okay.
Sure,
We didn't mark it as such, but people were kind of in and out.
sure. So you can each use your 5 together.
Be more succinct than that.
Your
He's
third
Batman.
panelist is
Third
coming
panel, hey
forward.
there, how you doing? Okay.
Yeah, good afternoon.
So
thank
wait,
you.
so do you want 15 because there are 3 of you?
No.
That's really
please
kind of
keep it
you.
to 3 total.
Do you want me to throw something at you if you
Yes.
go over 3? No, I won't do that. Okay.
No, we appreciate that, but no, I think we will be fairly quickly. I'm sorry, we'll be quick.
Oh yeah, and stay close to the mic
yeah.
so people can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. David Guy, Northern California Water Association, here, of course, with Thad Bettner, the general manager of Glen Calusa, and Louis Bear, RD108. We also have various counsel for Sacramento Valley folks in the room today that we've all been looking at this, obviously, very closely. I think, let me just say that at this point, you don't need to hear how grave the situation is out on the ground. But what is interesting is that is true in the Sacramento Valley as well. And I think as folks generally know, when we've gone into droughts in the past, the Sacramento Valley has always been able to provide some water to help meet needs in other parts of the state. And this year, the Sacramento Valley does not have water. Obviously, these guys can talk about that, but they're struggling to meet water for farms, for birds, obviously meeting some of the fish needs. And it's really challenging this year. You know that, but it's true in the Sacramento Valley. The California Water Action Plan, we appreciated the call there to really step up the efforts, and we heard a lot about that earlier, and we really encouraged that coordination and to continue working in that vein. With respect to the 2 issues that you've asked for today, let me just offer a couple of suggestions. First, on the temporary urgency permit portion, we're generally supportive of the concept there, and we've appreciated, I think, the opportunity to relax some of the standards, so to speak, to provide more water and storage. I think that's going to be good for everybody. We are looking very closely at this health and safety dynamic. And I think it was safe to say from the conversation that was going on earlier here that there's a lot of confusion on that, and we all need to have a better understanding of that. And I guess we would encourage you to think a lot about that. We are going to probably be providing some comments to you in a formal way before your deadline, because that is a big issue, and there's a lot of water at stake there, believe it or not. And so that is a big issue that none of us really understand. And from your conversations, it's pretty nebulous at this point. So we're going to look for a lot more conversations and understanding on that. With respect to the curtailment notices, and you're kind of asking for some questions there, we did have a couple of thoughts based on some conversations we've had with your staff as well. First, obviously, we appreciate the following the priority system. We think that is very important, and we think that is the guiding principle that will help us get through these challenging times. There are 2 opportunities we see there. The first is kind of this real-time monitoring and operations that your staff has talked about, and we absolutely encourage that and would love to work with you in that, because again, I'm sitting next to guys that understand the system, know what it looks like up in the Sacramento Valley, and there's a lot of others that are listening today probably that couldn't make it that can help with that as well. So we really encourage the real-time opportunities. And then I also think that there's ways to demarcate the different priority system. I think Tom Howard used the term tranche. I had to go look that up after he used it because I was so impressed with it. But is that the right term, Tom? Tranches? Sure. Tranches, which basically is splitting that up, and I think there's some history there with the Water Board doing that in various environmental documents and other
As opposed to
pieces
just
where you-
3 categories.
Yeah, so
doing
instead
it
of
in
just saying we're going to
chunks.
curtail all water rights, you start looking at it with respect to certain dates and being a little more strategic and specific, not only on the watersheds, but also with respect to the time frames within that. And we think there's some opportunities there as well. 2 other quick points, just with respect to salmon. Again, we've asked you, I think, on several instances to help with some of the coordination functions there with respect to your temperature task force. There have been some
progress made this year on some of the coordination from Livingston Stone, but obviously there's a lot more that needs to be done there in our view, and so we really ask for additional coordination and involving again the water users in some of those discussions, so that it's not just a bunch of folks sitting in Sacramento that are looking out over the rest of the state. And then finally, I'll just leave with the idea that I think it's pretty obvious, of course, when you get into these dynamics, that it would sure be nice to have a bunch of water and storage this year. And I think we all ought to take a real hard look. Our first order of business is obviously to get through this dry spell, however long that ends up being. But I think when that is over, I think we need to take a real hard look at how we keep that water in storage for all the beneficial purposes better as we go into the next drought, because I have a feeling this isn't going to be the last drought during our lifetime. So I will stop there. Thad and Lewis are here, a great resource if they want to add anything, or are obviously available for questions as well.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. Just a couple of notes, just to kind of reaffirm what David had said. You know, we got noticed over the weekend that our allocation's 40%. Obviously, we would wish it's higher, but no, we're in a better position than some other folks. But obviously, we're not sure what went into the development of that number. And I know we met with Dee Dee and Tom came out with a group of settlement contractors last week, and I think there was some concern about how is the Bureau operating the project, how may the board want to operate it. And just so you know, we've had several conversations with Reclamation. We'd like to work with them in order to make sure we're operating it as a system. I don't feel like it's really necessary for the board to get in there and have to worry about water rights as it relates to the permit issued to the project. As part of that, we will have some discussions with them, primarily on how we're going to operate for fisheries, and that certainly is one question, item 10 on your agenda. I'm glad to know that there's a real-time, you have your real-time operations team set up, but you know, we don't filter into that, and unfortunately a lot of our information filters back down through that group, if at all. And so we are concerned, being diverters on the river, that you know, we feel like we should be consulted in that process, make sure that you know, if there's ways that we can operate proactively with the fisheries, we have every intent of doing that, but we need to know going forward, not doing it not looking back. So that's critical to us. David also mentioned, you know, transfers. We are going to be extremely water short, so I think you can look at relatively no transfers coming out of the Sacramento Valley this year, and that's, I think, also going to be a challenge. And then lastly, you know, I would say that there's been several folks that talked about not just managing for the next 4 to 5 months, but we do need to have sort of a program of what are we going to be doing for the next 12 months. And, you know, we actually brought up a lot of these issues in March of last year when we had a dry year that, well, how's last year going to look like? We ended up not in good shape. We actually dumped a lot of water out of storage in the fall to protect fish. In hindsight, it would have been nice to have that water in storage now. And I think that's what we need to. We need to keep looking forward and make sure we're not just looking in the moment. Long term, again, those need to be ongoing conversations, because I feel like, you know, I think a lot of us are going to be looking today thinking things look pretty good in February 2014 versus in October 2014. Yeah. And so I just would give advice to your staff that, again, if there can be conversations to look forward, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
No, I think these guys covered it. I don't have much to add. Thanks. Available for questions.
Great.
Thad, could I talk you into more than a year or more than December?
Yeah,
2014?
well, I mean, I don't know how big you want to get. I mean, you know, there's a lot of conversations going on. David mentioned storage. We think storage in the Sac Valley is huge. So we've been talking about sites to you all. But, you know, providing a lot of benefits for fisheries, that feels that would be the right thing to do. Groundwater is huge. You know, the problem we have is we are managing a system in silos. You know, we talk about silos, but these sorts of things kick us into silos automatically. And we're trying to look at how do we get to a better holistic look at how do you operate, at least in our term, the Sacramento Valley, to provide all the public benefits that you're interested in, protecting our economy, et cetera. But we can't keep doing it, managing crisis to crisis. So, Fran, we'd love to have those conversations on a broader venue for sure.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm sure you were here with the real-time DOT, I guess, the team that talked about how they're moving forward, and it just seems to me that it needs to be as efficient as possible. They need to be not constrained so that they can be flexible. What recommendation would you have as far as ways that you could interact in order to complement that process rather than, be a hindrance with additional layers that would take more time?
Well, a good example is tomorrow afternoon, we have a conference call set up with Reclamation and a couple of the fishery agencies to talk about I think they're going to ask us if we can reoperate our diversions in the springtime to move fish out of the system. Well, we're already starting to plan our operations. We've sort of planned our operations. We don't know what they want in terms of flows. We don't know when they want to release. So we don't know what the plan is for the fall because we need to potentially save water for the fall. So kind of just being asked, hey, can we just talk to you about the specific issue about remanaging your diversions? We want to be part of the whole discussion. Tell us what you're doing with each run of fish, how you're managing that, all the actions we're taking, the things we're doing locally to try, for example, for winter run, we're trying to do things on the Colusa Basin Drain to salvage fish there and save fish. Where's our holistic discussion, how all the fisheries are being operated in the system? Don't just ask us to do one thing and then give you a pass on everything else, because we do believe there's better ways to manage the system for the beneficiaries, but we want that to be a dialogue and not a dictation to us.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Next, Barbara. You were up when you were out of the room. Go.
Barbara Vlamis, representing Aqua Alliance. I'd like to read something to you from a document in 2010. California's water resources have been stressed by periodic drought cycles and unprecedented restrictions in water diversions from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta in recent years. Climate change is expected to increase. It is not known if the current drought will abate soon or if it will persist for many years. However, it is certain that it is not the last drought that California will face. Well, that's from DWR's drought contingency plan from the last emergency proclamation from '09 with Governor Schwarzenegger. And it led me to think about our lawsuit, actually, at that time, about, what constitutes an emergency. Now, I agree that the potential is here, surely, but when we know this, when we are good people and we know that there are these problems, why aren't we planning for them adequately? Why don't we do it and have robust environmental review instead of rushing? A sudden, unexpected occurrence involving a clear and imminent danger, demanding immediate action to prevent or mitigate loss of or damage to life, health, property, or essential public services. Yes, I agree that has the potential to happen, but we know this, and I know that you know this as well. And I take great issue that we're always avoiding CEQA. CEQA's guidelines define an emergency as follows: a sudden, unexpected occurrence involving a clear and imminent danger, demanding immediate action to prevent or mitigate loss of or damage to life, health, property, and essential public services. Emergency includes such occurrences as fire, flood, earthquake, or other soil or geologic movements, as well as such occurrences as riot, accident, or sabotage. Drought's an ongoing condition here. We know this. My colleagues made that quite clear with Bill's wonderful presentation. We've also had these very extended droughts. From 892 to 1112 AD was an extended drought. 1209 to 1350. We've been living in this abnormally wet kind of 20th century. And I doubt that if people really thought about it, that entrepreneurs and agencies would have invested so much treasure in building dams and canals to develop desert agriculture and grassy municipalities if they kept this in mind. I want to focus on groundwater a bit. Something that was brought to my attention by the Delta Stewardship Council's EIR that I thought was quite helpful and is something that should absolutely be corrected immediately. They pointed out that DWR has not updated the section on overdraft in Bulletin 180. They have not updated it yet, so we're estimating that there's 1 to 2 million acre-feet annually of overdraft in California. So we're, in light of this deficit of analysis since 80 and the use only of an estimate of overdraft, albeit one that is massive with tremendous range, what data and analysis have been used to justify the expansion of past practices like conjunctive use, conjunctive management, and water transfers with groundwater substitution? We're doing it all in a vacuum, just like how we plan for droughts, apparently. The immense failures of water management in California have already caused extensive overdraft and the collapse of fisheries and ecosystems. I want to quickly point out USGS indicates that over a 42-year period between 62 and 04, the Tulare Basin's groundwater elevations have plummeted as 70 million acre-feet of water were withdrawn cumulatively and not returned. The vast abuse of a common resource is unconscionable. I see my time is running out. The California and federal governments created a quagmire of unrealistic water expectations and resulting environmental disasters over many decades. This decision was sealed by the State Water Resources Control Board that has approved contracted state and federal water project deliveries that are more than 5 times greater than available water. The ensuing biological disintegration of the Owens Valley, the San Joaquin River watershed, and the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is the result. So much of the damage is irreversible. And the damage continues to march north, harming what remains of the hydrologic and biologic tapestry. As the Sacramento Valley goes, so goes California. And I ask you, all of you good people, when will you proclaim that you understand this, so that we, the public that are counting on you, will see you finally disclose and act upon the fact that the emperor has no clothes? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. It is after 3, and so instead of Dave Brent, is Martha Hennahan here? Or Dave is here? Hello. Nice job on Friday, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I am Dave Brent. I'm the City of Sacramento's Director for the Department of Utilities. We're here today to provide you with information regarding one of the impacts of this drought, and which is related to the order you've issued. But we're not here to object to that order, but to inform you of a potentially significant consequence of an extremely low river levels. A little bit about the city. We operate 2 water treatment plants, one on the Sacramento River, one on the American River, and a number of groundwater wells in the northern part of the city. The one on the American River is currently the one we have in operation. We have the Sacramento River plant shut down for maintenance, and we have a $170 million construction contract ongoing. That plant will be up and going by the end of February. As you're aware, Folsom Reservoir is at dangerously low levels. We've been working, the city, with the American River Water Forum, been working since early December on addressing this drought situation, and the city did adopt a stage 2 water shortage contingency on January 14th. So we're about a month into that. That requires a 20% reduction in overall demand in the city. So we are a partially metered city, so as I explained on Friday, our approach is going to be a portfolio approach, really aggressively hitting the outdoor irrigation component of our water use going forward into the summer. We have been taking some significant emergency actions already. As I told you, we're running on the American River right now to meet our demands and our groundwater wells. When the Bureau reduced flows to 500 cubic feet per second back in January, we found that our pumps, that's the design level of our pumps, and some of them started experiencing cavitation. So we went and rented submersible pumps that dropped down lower into our bay, and we're able to bring water in through that. Next week, I will be going to City Council asking them to approve an emergency contract to bring up about 9 more groundwater wells that have been on standby but need a lot of maintenance. We're hoping to have those wells in place before the summer demand hits. And we're also going with an emergency contract to remove sediments from our American River intake, Sacramento River intake, which we'll bring back in service here at the end of the month. We need to get those sediments out of that intake. It's normally not as consequential to have the sediments in there, but again, with the anticipated low water levels on the Sacramento River, we're going to be pushing the threshold of that treatment plant also, and that's really what I'm to talk about today. We've already experienced the cavitation that we've seen on the American River. We've also agreed, and again, working with Reclamation, with the Water Forum, and our upstream neighbors who rely solely on Folsom Reservoir, to do the best we can this coming summer to try to live on the Sacramento River and stay off the American River. Typically, it would be about a 50-50 split with our groundwater. So we're going to try to do the best we can to utilize Sac River plant. But once again, with this order, we don't know where the river's going to be. So we have been meeting with the Bureau and the state to try to get a sense of the operational issues that they're going to have, and potentially we also. So I think that's really what the best solution to this is an operational solution for us. I mean, to work closely with the Bureau and DWR on the operations of those plants. But if I haven't said it already, I just want to say we have a potential with a low river on the Sac River to see cavitation of our pumps on the Sacramento River too. So as we speak, like I said, 2 emergency contracts. Our planning team is looking at what would it take to install submersibles out on Sacramento River, which is just more difficult, and I won't get into those details. But we're looking at all angles to see if we can get water out at a lower level. And we've never been here before. We don't know how low it's going to get. We don't know if our design, typically, and I'm hoping design has a little bit of slop in it, but we're certainly going to be hitting the thresholds of that design capacity. So I just wanted you to be aware of the circumstance, and to our knowledge, we've never been here before with this, and it's a new challenge that we're all facing. Thank you.
Of course you may.
I know you have until 2025 to meter.
Correct.
Are you reconsidering that deadline?
Well, the state deadline is 2025.
Right.
We've been on record for a long time that we would love to have those in much sooner. I mean, meters are our #1 tool. Where City Council adopted $77 million worth of meters over this 3-year period that started 2 fiscal years ago. So we're in year 3 of that, or we will be July 2015. We're about 50% metered, and certainly we would accelerate that. It's a matter of money. We got about another $250 million to spend on the meter program. And what we're doing along the way is replace, because a lot of our infrastructure is in backyards. So we have old, 100-year-old leaky pipes in backyards, and we've studied this 3 times now, if it would make sense to go in and slap a meter in your backyard, and it just makes no sense. And part of our program, too, is water loss reduction. So a lot of the challenges we face is in metering the city is putting new lines out in the street and replumbing the houses coming in from the front as opposed to the back. So we do spend a lot more money than if you were just slapping meters in, but that is part of that overall program cost. But personally, I am, and I know our city council is committed to getting meters in as quickly as we can. And with the 2020 mandate, it would certainly help us have meters in by 2020 to be measuring all that, all that water use reductions, and we could do it on an individual basis.
Well, since you're going to the city council anyway for other things related to the drought, I would throw, I would mention that the meters are a key centerpiece to your plan, and the sooner you get those in, way before 2025. Otherwise, you're just going to have worse problems in the future. So I think you have some fodder here to use with your city council, and I urge you to do it.
Yeah, no, they took bold measure 2 years ago, and I'm this again, like you say, fodder for that continued commitment to doing funding that project. Yeah.
Right, thanks. And I appreciated hearing Friday of how aggressively you were moving on enforcement in the outdoor watering, since it was such a big percentage of urban water use, and it was something you could just see and do without the meter. So I thought that was good to know.
Yeah, thank you.
I see Mr. Porgins has returned. Called you a while ago.
Make sure you got my 5 minutes up there.
You're,
You cut me off just at 5 minutes. I want you to do that to me so you can enforce your rule.
oh,
Okay, my name is Patrick Porgans. I'm with excuse me, Porgans and Associates, and I'm here representing Planetary Solutionaries, de facto public trustees. We're effectively taking and doing your job. All due respect to the members of the board, congratulations for being up there. I don't know how many boards I've been through. I've been involved for 40 years. Been in every major drought that you've had here. I was monitoring the operations of the projects beforehand, and I'll discuss that in a moment. I want to talk about the TUC and with respect to some comments that were made in there and the accuracy of the information that's been presented to this board. First of all, the way I make and discern what's going on in my life is I look at the track record of the one who's performing. I'm a forensic auditor, and what I do is I go back and do regressive analysis. And what's happened here, and this is what I'm going to say to you today. First of all, I think that this TUC is just a little too broad. It's too broad. Number two, I'm going to show, and I'm not here to provide written documentation. I'm here because I'm calling for a hearing. I think this board should have a hearing. And the reason why this board should have a hearing is I'm going to present information to you to show conclusively that there's a pattern to the way the projects have been operating since the onset of the droughts in 1976 and 77. The 87-92, the 2008 to 2011. I'll show you that they've managed, and I'm saying there's no water shortage in California, and anybody in this room, anybody, says there is, I'll challenge them and show them there's not. You have a misallocation and mismanagement of water resources. That's what you have here, and I wrote that story in 1980. I have 75 fact-finding volumes on water alone in the West. When in 1976, the Department of Water Resources made a decision to export 600,000 acre-feet of water, surplus, for $2.95 delivered from Oroville down into Kern County. I opposed that move because I said if you have another dry year, you're going to have a problem. They went ahead and acted like it wasn't happening. That sets the stage for the SB 346. SB 346 was going to develop additional water supplies to make up for the shortages that were inherent in the State Water Project. The agencies that are presenting information to you here today, the ones that are operating the project, are in fact the ones that have exacerbated the problem. Now, when you make, I don't know what Mr. Jackson is talking about or that other group, because as far as I'm concerned, they are also responsible for this condition that we have here, for all these years that they've been going along with this nonsense. I'm saying to you right here that when you talk about a 500-year drought, for example, I talk to these people. There's no climatological data to substantiate that other than tree rings. That's an observation. That's not a quantitative analysis. So what I'm suggesting to you, during that 76, 77 drought, when they dumped the reservoirs, they came back here and asked for relaxation. That's what they did, because they said they couldn't meet the standard. In the 1987, 1992 period, we showed that there were record-breaking exports going on from the projects. As a matter of fact, in the fifth year of the drought, they delivered, I think it was the second or the first highest amount of water that's ever been delivered. In 2011, the second highest amount of water delivered. So if we looked at agriculture just from the point of view of almond orchards, we would see that almond orchards increased from 470,000 acres in 1995 to it's 840,000 acres now. If you use 3.4 acre feet per acre, depending upon where you are, and I took a 10-year period, and if you take that 3.4 times just even 400,000 new acres in, you got 1.2 million acre feet of water. Okay? So what I'm saying is that these guys down there expanded their agricultural base after the 1992 drought. Each time these guys come back here, and of course, you know, I've done all the analysis on that. I'm saying to you, that, and in all due respect to Mr. Howard, you know, on his page 13, he talks about something to the effect how, based upon the available evidence, it appears that these guys, you know, there's an urgent need. I'm not arguing. Okay, there's an urgent need. But the urgent need was fostered by the operational management decisions associated with the water supply delivery system. That's the facts. That's just facts. And when you hold your hearing, I'll bring those facts to you and show you that that's in the record. And each time you relax the standard, these guys go back and violate the standards. The fact that the agencies, the fishery agencies, come here and tell you that, you know, this looks like this is going to work. I remember 1992, CVPIA, doubling the fish. Fish are a disaster. I also remember, and I've got this documented, what you're looking at here with this TUC is more transfer water and abandoned water. We need to know more about in real time what's going on as to how much water they're actually taking out of the system, just like that 5,500 last week. Take the 5,500 and minus from the 15, if you want to minus it or just throw it in all together, and set aside some of that water to be used in the Delta. We need to start charging these guys for taking water that normally wouldn't be in storage. And then we got to start looking at the cumulative impacts associated with that. I tried to sue you. I couldn't get a decent lawyer, okay? Somebody that would stand up to you. Probably because I didn't have enough money. That's possible. But anyway, my point is that I'm saying to you today, and in conclusion, I have every violation right here. And if you need any more information, I'll come when you have a hearing. But as far as I'm concerned, the state of California created its own crisis. This board has allowed the project operators too much latitude. If you go with this, remember what temporary is. 1991 temporary barriers. 2014 temporary barriers. The reason why we have temporary barriers is because the Department of Water Resources failed to provide the water conveyance and water quality protections assured under Section 12934 of the Water Code. So when you come back here taking water back off these people in the North State, you know, at the expense or to the betterment of the people in the South State, and more specifically in the San Joaquin Valley, you're doing an injustice and you're creating a very dangerous precedent. At any rate, I'm so happy to get out of this room because every time I come here, I have to tell you, I get sick. Forgive me.
Thanks, Mr. Porgan.
Billions of dollars spent, and you people have a problem that's worse than it ever was. You remember me, Miss Tam? I came here and I told you guys, back when, you don't have a contingency plan, you don't have a comprehensive surface and groundwater plan. So you got what you asked for.
Next, Michael Warburton, Executive Director, Public Trust Alliance.
Executive Director of a nonprofit group that is trying to raise the profile of the public trust doctrine, which I know you have spent a lot of time working on. But I find myself in tremendous agreement with the group of people who've been talking here, who should have been on a panel together, from Barbara Lamas to Mr. Herrick and, well, even Dante and Michael Jackson. It could have been the same panel, and it was really good. And I go along totally with some of the recommendations that they've made, especially the fact that an urgency petition is not the way to handle this problem. And our group has been concerned that the State Water Board has not been using the institutional science that is available to work on the institutional aspects of dealing with scientific uncertainty. I was working at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis when C.S. Holling and Carl Walters from University of British Columbia were putting together their theories of adaptive management and system resilience. I worked with a British anthropologist on a discussion paper for the UN Environment Program about actually the misuse of scientific uncertainty to justify systemically irrational behavior. And what we've got in water law is a standard of reasonable behavior. And what's happening in this drought is that instead of, for example, farmers and urban users collaborating and working together, you have technologies like desalinization thought of, where you're using so much energy for something that you never used energy before, and yet this commitment of public resources is being called reasonable because you have a bunch of lawyers who say it's reasonable because it's reasonable, and they're not using just plain science. And if some of the literature on uncertainty was worked on in the board, that I think could be very, very helpful to what you're doing. And in any case, I think that the collaborative approach is great, but the idea that this real-time committee is not doing their business in public is a continuation of the same mismanagement that has been going on forever. And if this could be done, the public trust, the water belongs to the people, and the people deserve to know about it. And I couldn't figure out from this temporary urgency petition what water was going where. But I knew from my historical experience that there was a lot of finagling that would happen. And you can't do that kind of thing if you just do it in public. And anyway, our organization would certainly like to stand up for more transparency in water policy and a use of science that is available, and not just the same old stuff that people have been doing over and over again that actually isn't actual science. And I have a hard time with what's happened with the Independent Science Board. But anyway, really definitely like some of the comments that what Barbara said about the emperor not having clothes. That's a story that school kids learn, but that's what the problem's been in drought response. And what it takes is more transparent discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Warburton. Last card for this afternoon. Tim O'Laughlin, San Joaquin Tributaries Authority.
You thought you were going to get away with it. Good morning, good afternoon, board chair, board members, staff. Coming here today, I was, a lot of the presentations were very interesting and fulfilling, but one that kind of left me empty was in your staff presentation at the beginning, you, staff said they were going to talk about curtailments. And I heard the word,
Right.
and I've heard no discussion. So there's a lot of, as you can well imagine, you sent out a notice in January. There's been a myriad of speculation about what those notices may look like. We've heard today, are we going to plan watershed by watershed? Are we going to look at the Bay Delta? There's been discussions about a Delta outflow component. There's a discussion about a public trust component. Some of these things we've dealt with before in the 76, 77, 87, 92 drought. Some of the stuff sounds kind of new. So if you are going to go tomorrow and have a continuation of this process, I would just ask for
A little more on curtailments.
yeah, if
and
your
our
staff
current
could
thinking.
kind of tell
Sure.
us, because I've heard stuff like your staff is meeting with DWR staff and talking about, what are the measurements for curtailment, I think people would like to know what the matrix looks like, what at least from an initial exposure, what your staff and your resource management people are thinking about in the regards, and then, because it's kind of hard to respond to the questions that you put forward in your curtailment notice without kind of understanding what maybe a basic game plan looks like. So if you could do that tomorrow, that'd be great.
Great.
That's it.
I think that's true. I have to admit, I was expecting a room full of people with questions and comments about curtailment
Yeah, I think
today, and that didn't happen. So
Yeah, I think-
that is what we should be talking about, in addition to the temporary urgency change petition and whether we should hold a hearing or what the measures are, or even how we got here and larger questions of water management in California and the question of what we can do, what our tools are to deal with some of the issues that people raised today. So a number of
Yeah.
questions raised that are all valid questions, but I was also expecting more people to show up about curtailment.
Yeah, and it's very hard. So like, I'll just throw out an example. So like the temporary urgency change petition. So my clients don't have a major concern with the temporary urgency change petition, but I heard somebody say that there's going to be a delta outflow component, maybe in regards to curtailment. Well, if there's an outflow component in regards to the curtailment, is that going to be handled as part of the temporary urgency change petition? Because currently the projects are on the hook for meeting X2 and delta outflow. So just kind of cleaning up some of that stuff would be helpful, plus all the rumor mill would die down a great deal and probably be much more functional about how this thing is going to unfold as we move forward. And I appreciate it.
I think that's a good suggestion. Is
Thank
that
you.
something you guys can bring some clarity to right now, but also maybe talk about it in a little more depth tomorrow in terms of the options and what you're thinking about?
We could certainly provide a little more detail on the factors that we're considering. We could even put up some additional figures, graphs, et cetera, for some of the scenarios that we may be looking at or seeing in some of the watersheds. But I can't guarantee that any of that is, one, going to be current. I don't know that we have the time to prepare to be able to present anything in any detail for tomorrow. But we certainly could
I think
provide
a little more depth than we had today would certainly be helpful. There was a lot going on in the presentations today, and it is the core of what we do in terms of our role and responsibility under the water rights law, and I do think it would be helpful to get into at least a little more detail tomorrow, if not now.
Yeah, I
in terms of what
understand
to
that-
expect.
Right, I understand that the information may not be current. We're in this evolving process every day, but if we at least get a handle on maybe where a starting point is, and we can start the discussion from some basic understanding of our knowledge base, and then move forward. Thank you.
No, I agree with that.
We can come back with some greater detail tomorrow. I guess I would only ask Michael, is there any issue with respect to noticing or?
No, so first of all, this was noticed as a workshop. There's no action item before the board,
Right.
and everybody was on notice that this would extend not only through today, but into tomorrow if necessary. And certainly the curtailment issue was one of the issues that was flagged. So, and obviously, the board has indicated that this is going to be a recurring issue. I mean, as long as the drought persists, you all are going to be hearing matters concerning the drought, and as it is refined in terms of the staff's approach on curtailment, you'll obviously have the opportunity to hear even more beyond what you'll hear in the morning.
Right. I'm trying to think, is there anything else for tomorrow?
Could I just get a clarification? On my calendar, it says we're back in coastal tomorrow.
We have to us, so if you'd like to come down off of on
Yeah, if we could,
high-
if I don't have to sit up to look over the thing, that would really, I was gonna bring a pillow to sit on after lunch, but I forgot.
Cocky by having to be on the edge of my seat. That's the only way I can see around this thing.
Well, like you, we expected more involvement, especially as it relates to the curtailment discussion, and so we booked the larger room, but we're happy to move
prudent.
next door.
Great, all right. Well, a lot to think about overnight. Folks have asked us to do certain things that deal with what came before and what we should do in the future, and I'll have a lot of questions about what our authorities are and aren't on some of the things people have talked about, but I think I want to sleep on some of it and shorten my list up to save people's time a little bit. So if there are no further questions now, thank you all for your attention. We appreciate you all coming, and we will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow in the Coastal Room, which is right next door.